On March 8, 1971, at the Desert Inn's Crystal Room in Las Vegas, Frank Sinatra collapsed onto the stage floor during My Way. What happened next left 2,000 people breathless and revealed the secret that had haunted America's greatest entertainer for 3 devastating years. If this story moves you, hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in the power of human kindness. Frank Sinatra was 3 verses into My Way when the weight of carrying America's most devastating secret finally became too much for even the chairman of the board to bear. The Desert Inn's Crystal Room was packed with 2,000 of Las Vegas's elite high rollers, movie stars, and politicians who had paid premium prices to see Old Blue Eyes perform on what many suspected might be one of his final tours. But something was different about Frank that night. His usual confident swagger seemed forced. His signature smile appeared strained under the bright stage lights, and those who knew him well noticed his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the microphone stand. The song that had become his anthem, his declaration of independence and strength, was the very song that was about to bring him to his knees. Earlier that evening, Frank had received a phone call in his dressing room that changed everything. The voice on the other end was familiar. Someone from his past who had remained silent for nearly 8 years. Frank, the caller, had said, "It's time. The American people deserve to know the truth about what really happened to Jack Kennedy. And you're the only one left who can tell them." But the most devastating part was yet to come. As Frank reached the line, "I faced it all and I stood tall," his voice cracked with an emotion that had nothing to do with the music. His knees buckled slightly, but he caught himself on the microphone stand, his knuckles white with the strain of holding himself upright. The orchestra continued playing, but Frank's attention was completely captured by something the audience couldn't see. A memory so powerful, so guilt-ridden, that it was literally bringing down the man who had sworn he would never show weakness in public. 3 years earlier, Frank had made a decision that saved thousands of lives but destroyed his own peace of mind forever. Wait, this single detail changes everything you thought you knew about Frank Sinatra. Instead of powering through the song as he had done countless times before, Frank suddenly stopped singing mid-verse and staggered backward. His face went pale, his breathing became labored, and for a terrifying moment it looked like America's greatest entertainer was having a heart attack on stage. The audience gasped in unison as Frank's legs gave way completely and he collapsed onto the polished stage floor, his tuxedo jacket spreading around him like black wings. The Crystal Room fell into stunned silence, 2,000 people frozen in disbelief as their idol lay motionless under the blazing spotlights. But this wasn't a medical emergency. This was the moment Frank Sinatra's conscience finally caught up with him. For exactly 37 seconds, Frank lay on that stage, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling with the irregular rhythm of a man wrestling with demons. The orchestra had stopped playing, the waiters had stopped serving, and even the casino's slot machines seemed to quiet in respect for whatever was happening to the voice. Then Frank's eyes opened, and what the audience saw in them wasn't pain or confusion. It was the clear, determined gaze of a man who had just made the most important decision of his life. The audience thought they were about to witness a tragedy, but then Frank did something that changed everything. Slowly, deliberately, Frank pushed himself up from the stage floor, not to his feet, that would come later, but to a sitting position, cross-legged on the stage like a man preparing to tell a campfire story. He reached for the microphone stand, pulled it down to his level, and looked out at 2,000 concerned faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank's voice was quiet but carried perfectly through the Crystal Room's sound system, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told the world 3 years ago." The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear the ice melting in abandoned cocktail glasses at distant tables. "On November 22, 1963, Frank continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "President Kennedy was supposed to be in Las Vegas. Not Dallas. Las Vegas. He was supposed to be sitting right there." Frank pointed to the VIP booth in the corner of the Crystal Room, watching me perform. "Stop. What you're about to hear changes everything you thought you knew about that November day in 1963. Frank's revelation sent shockwaves through the audience, but he was just getting started. Still sitting on the stage floor looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him, Frank began to tell the story that had been eating him alive for nearly 8 years. 3 days before Jack was supposed to come to Vegas, I got a call from someone in his administration. They said there had been a change of plans. Instead of Vegas, the president would be going to Dallas. They asked me to keep quiet about the Vegas trip, said it was a matter of national security. Frank's hands were shaking now, but not from weakness. They were shaking with the weight of carrying a secret that had implications beyond anything anyone in that room could imagine. I never questioned it. I was disappointed, sure, but I never questioned why they would send the president to Dallas instead of keeping him safe in Vegas, where I could have protected him, where we all could have protected him. The Crystal Room remained absolutely silent. Even the casino sounds from the floor below seemed muted, as if the entire Desert Inn was holding its breath. But the real shock was still coming. Frank slowly rose to his feet, using the microphone stand for support. When he was fully upright, he looked directly into the spotlight, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the room understand they were witnessing something historic. I found out later that the call didn't come from Jack's people. It came from someone who wanted him in Dallas. Someone who knew that changing his schedule from Vegas to Dallas would put him exactly where they needed him to be. The implications of what Frank was saying began to dawn on the audience. If President Kennedy had come to Las Vegas as originally planned, if he had been sitting in the Crystal Room watching Frank perform instead of riding through Dealey Plaza, Jack Kennedy died because someone knew I would never question an order that claimed to be about national security. They used my patriotism, my respect for the office, to manipulate me into staying quiet about a schedule change that cost the president his life. Frank's voice broke completely on the last word, and for the first time in his professional career, he didn't try to hide his tears. Stop. The revelation that's coming next will change how you understand November 22, 1963 forever. Frank wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving streaks on his carefully applied stage makeup. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who had been carrying the world's greatest burden alone. For 3 years, I've been asking myself the same question every night. What if I had called Jack directly? What if I had insisted on confirmation? What if I had refused to cancel the Vegas appearance without hearing it from the president himself? The audience was beginning to understand that they weren't just watching a performer have a breakdown, they were witnessing a confession that could rewrite history. I know what you're thinking, Frank continued. You're thinking I should have gone to the authorities. You're thinking I should have told the Warren Commission. But how do you explain to the world that the President of the United States might be alive if Frank Sinatra had been a little less trusting, a little less patriotic, a little less willing to follow orders without question? Frank began pacing the stage now, his energy returning as the words poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. The people who called me that day, they knew I would never betray what I thought was a presidential secret. They knew I would take it to my grave rather than compromise national security. They used my loyalty against me, and it worked perfectly. But the most incredible part was yet to be revealed. Frank stopped pacing and faced the audience directly. What he said next would become the most quoted statement in entertainment history, a moment when a performer transcended entertainment and became a voice for justice. I'm not asking for your forgiveness because what I did can't be forgiven. I'm not asking for your understanding because what happened can't be understood. I'm asking for your help because somewhere out there the people who made that call are still walking free, still thinking they outsmarted Frank Sinatra, still believing they can manipulate good people into doing terrible things. The standing ovation that began in the back of the Crystal Room spread like wildfire through the audience. But it wasn't applause for a performance, it was applause for courage, for honesty, for a man who had risked everything to tell a truth that needed to be told. Frank raised his hand to quiet the crowd, but the applause continued for 11 minutes, the longest ovation in Desert Inn history. During those 11 minutes, something extraordinary happened in that room. Strangers began embracing, tears flowed freely, and a sense of shared purpose filled the air. The audience understood they had witnessed more than entertainment, they had witnessed history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank finally said when the applause subsided, "I need you to understand something else. The guilt I've carried isn't just about Jack Kennedy. It's about every American who trusted their government to tell them the truth. It's about every family member who lost someone and never got real answers. It's about a system that uses good people's patriotism against them." Frank's voice grew stronger as he continued, feeding off the energy of an audience that was completely with him. "Tonight I'm not just Frank Sinatra confessing his mistakes. Tonight I'm every American who has been lied to, manipulated, and used by people in power who think ordinary citizens can't handle the truth." Wait until you hear what happened in the hours after Frank's confession. When the applause finally died down, Frank did something unprecedented. Instead of finishing his set, instead of trying to return to normal entertainment, he invited the entire audience to stay as his guests for the rest of the evening. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this isn't what you paid to see tonight, but if you'll stay with me, I want to sing every song Jack Kennedy ever requested. I want to perform the concert he never got to see." What followed was the most emotionally charged performance in Las Vegas history. Frank sang for 4 hours straight, performing every song that had been on the playlist for the president's canceled Vegas visit. He sang "High Hopes," Kennedy's campaign song. He sang "The House I Live In," which JFK had once called the most patriotic song ever written. And when Frank finally sang "My Way Again," the song that had triggered his collapse, he changed the final verse to include the words, "And when I was wrong, I faced the music, and I stood tall not just for me, but for the truth that sets us free." The audience wept openly as Frank transformed his signature song from a declaration of independence into a confession of responsibility. But the real impact of that night was just beginning. Within 48 hours, Frank's confession had made headlines around the world. The Sinatra reveals JFK's secret dominated front pages from New York to London. The story sparked renewed investigations into the Kennedy assassination, with several government agencies launching inquiries into who might have had the authority and motivation to manipulate the president's schedule. More importantly, Frank's willingness to accept responsibility for his unwitting role in the tragedy inspired others to come forward. Secret Service agents who had questioned the Dallas trip began speaking publicly. White House staff members revealed their own suspicions about the schedule change. A web of evidence began emerging that suggested the assassination had been far more carefully orchestrated than anyone had previously imagined. Stop. What you're about to discover next reveals the true power of that moment of collapse. Frank's confession didn't just impact the Kennedy investigation. It fundamentally changed how America thought about celebrity responsibility and moral courage. Entertainment figures who had remained silent about political issues suddenly found their voices. The idea that fame came with an obligation to speak truth to power became known as the Sinatra standard. Within weeks of Frank's confession, other major celebrities began coming forward with their own suppressed stories. Dean Martin revealed that he had been asked by unknown government officials to report on Frank's activities in the early 1960s. Sammy Davis Jr. admitted that he had received mysterious payments to stay quiet about certain political events he had witnessed. Even Marilyn Monroe's former publicist broke decades of silence to reveal that the actress had been under surveillance for her political activities. The entertainment industry was experiencing its own awakening, with Frank's moment of vulnerability becoming a catalyst for unprecedented honesty about the intersection of celebrity and politics. But perhaps most importantly, Frank's moment of vulnerability on that Desert Inn stage proved that even the strongest people have breaking points, and that sometimes collapse is the first step toward redemption. The man who had built his career on projections of strength and invincibility had shown the world that real courage meant admitting when you were wrong, even when the stakes were impossibly high. In the months that followed, Frank established the Kennedy Truth Foundation, dedicated to investigating unresolved questions about the assassination. He funded private investigators, supported whistleblowers, and used his platform to keep pressure on government agencies to release classified documents. The foundation's work contributed to the passage of the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act in 1992, which mandated the release of previously classified assassination-related documents. Years later, the full impact became clear when historians revealed that Frank's confession had been the catalyst for the most significant re-examination of the Kennedy assassination since the Warren Commission. Documents released as a result of investigations sparked by Frank's revelation supported his claim that the president's schedule had been manipulated by unknown parties. The final revelation will leave you speechless. When Frank Sinatra died in 1998, investigators found a safe in his Palm Springs home containing dozens of documents related to the Kennedy assassination. Among them was a handwritten letter from President Kennedy himself dated November 19, 1963, just 3 days before the assassination. The letter read, "Frank, I'm looking forward to the Vegas show. After Dallas, I need a night with friends who make me laugh instead of advisors who make me worry. See you soon, Jack." The letter proved that President Kennedy had been planning to go to Las Vegas after Dallas, not instead of Dallas. Frank had been carrying guilt for nearly 30 years over a schedule change that had never actually occurred. The president had been planning to visit both cities. But the letter also revealed something else. Someone had deliberately fed Frank false information about a schedule change, not to redirect the president but to ensure that Frank would blame himself for Kennedy's death. The psychological manipulation had been designed to silence one of Kennedy's most influential supporters by crushing him with guilt. The most chilling discovery came in the letter's postscript, written in Kennedy's own hand. "Frank, if anything happens to me in Dallas, remember that the Vegas show must go on. The American people need their entertainers to keep fighting for truth, even when their politicians can't." It was as if Kennedy had somehow sensed the danger he was walking into, and had wanted to ensure that Frank would continue to be a voice for justice. The Desert Inn's Crystal Room was demolished in 1993, but the exact spot where Frank collapsed that night is now marked by a plaque in the Wynn Las Vegas, which was built on the same site. The inscription reads, "March 8, 1971, the night Frank Sinatra chose truth over reputation and showed America that collapse can be the beginning of courage." Frank's moment of physical collapse had become a symbol of moral resurrection. His willingness to break down in public had broken open one of history's most important conspiracies, and proved that sometimes the most powerful thing a celebrity can do is show the world their weakest moment. And that's how Frank Sinatra's collapse on a Las Vegas stage became the moment when entertainment transformed into activism, when vulnerability became strength, and when one man's guilt became a nation's path toward truth.